Good morning, boys and girls. We'd like to welcome you to the History Center. It's the name of our building. And we're going to talk about life in Oxford 100 years ago because we heard that you're learning about the number 100. How many of you can count to 100? Oh, good job. So the first thing we're going to do, this is the day in a kindergartner. We're going to get up at 6 a.m. in the morning. That's very early, and the reason you're getting up so early is because you have chores to do. And if you lived on a farm outside of Oxford, you would have chores to do for your parents. And the one that probably some of you'd like to do, you'd go out to the barn and help your dad milk the cows. Maybe you would give the cows hay or grain to eat, and then you could go over to the hen house and collect the eggs. You'd put them in a little basket and you take them in the house to your mother. And even if you lived in town, your mother would have given you some type of chores to do. In 1924, homes were heated with coal or wood, not like the heaters that we have today. And down in your basement will be a big pile of coal, and the coal looked like this. And your mom, this would be one of your chores, your mom would give you this little shovel, and you'd get the coal and put it in a bucket, and then you take it upstairs, and your mom would put it in the stove, and they burn this coal. It would get real red when they burn it. And then she would cook the food on top of the stove. And back in 1924, we didn't have microwaves or electric refrigerators or stoves or blenders or toasters. So one of the things that was really interesting was how you kept your things cold. Now, how many of you have seen the movie Frozen? Oh, at the beginning of the movie, do you remember when the men were cutting with big saws? Yeah. Do you remember that part? And they were singing that real loud song? Well, what they were doing was they were cutting blocks of ice. And that's what they did in Oxford in 1924. In the wintertime, when the lakes and the ponds and the streams froze, they would go out with big saws and cut big blocks of ice. They'd put the blocks of ice on a wagon, and they would use these tongs. These are smaller ones. But you can see Christoph, do you remember when he was using the tongs to carry the ice around? And they would put the ice on a wagon, and the horses would pull it back to the house, and they would have a building there called an ice house. And the building was built down into the ground, and it had a roof on it that was very close to the ground. So they put the ice in there, and they covered it up with straw to keep it from melting. Then, when the Iceman, and there was ones here in Oxford, and they would take their wagons, and their horses would pull the wagon up and down the streets with these big blocks of ice, and they would walk right in your house, go right over to your refrigerator, and they'd put a big block of ice right in there. Shut the door, and out the door he would go to the next house. And one of your chores might have been down below, when that ice melted every day, someone had to take the container that the water was in and go outside and dump it out. And that was another one of the chores some of the children had to do. So, all right, so now we're getting ready for breakfast. And we'll change the clock. Boys and girls, it's 8 o'clock now. You've been doing chores for 2 hours, so you have worked up quite an appetite. Can I have your microphone? There we go. There you go. Thanks. So you have worked up quite an appetite. Now, I forgot to eat breakfast this morning, but I bet you did not. What did you have for breakfast this morning? Did you eat breakfast? Yeah. You forget. There you go. How about you?
I had a breakfast bar.
A breakfast bar. Well, in 1924, your breakfast bar might have been a biscuit that Mom made in the kitchen on that coal stove. What did you have for breakfast? You had a banana. You could have had bananas in 1924. That's an excellent breakfast. Did anybody have eggs?
I did.
Did you? In 1924, where do you think we got those eggs? From chickens. That's exactly right. If you lived on a farm, you ate some of those eggs that Mrs. Mark told you about just now. You went out and you collected those eggs and you brought them back and you gave them to Mom, and she cooked your eggs. Where do you think you got your milk if you lived on a farm?
That's exactly right. You drank milk that came from the farm. But if you lived in town, in the town of Oxford, and you didn't have a cow in your backyard, you, believe it or not, would put your empty milk bottle outside of your door at night, and the next morning, just about when you were out doing your chores, the milkman would come and he would leave milk at your door, a brand new bottle of milk. You could buy milk in a quart or a pint. They didn't have gallons of milk like we buy now because remember, the ice only lasts one day. So they sold things in a little bit smaller quantities for that. So when mom goes to make your breakfast in the morning, first of all, I want you to know that everybody had breakfast together. That was the normal thing to do. Now, I don't know about you, but I have a little first grade granddaughter, and she eats her breakfast standing on one foot in front of the television watching a Bluey episode while she eats her cereal. But in 1924, you sat down at the table and ate breakfast as a family. That was really important. Now, speaking of eating her cereal, in 1924, this is hard to believe, cereal did not have sugar. I know, none, no sugar. But there might have been a sugar bowl at your table, and mom might have let you put a little bit of sugar on your cold cereal. Not only that, but there weren't that many cereals available. You had Post Toasties, that was made from corn. And you had Wheaties. That was the new cereal for 1924. 100 years ago, Wheaties cereal became popular. You also ate lots of oatmeal. And in a few minutes, Mrs. Hess is going to tell you why your mom wanted you to eat so much oatmeal. But in 1924, oatmeal was different. It wasn't the little pack that you open. You go to the store and you buy those little packs of oatmeal, and it's apples and cinnamon and peanut butter and all kinds of flavors, strawberry. No, oatmeal was just oats. And you had to cook it for maybe 25 minutes, and you had to stir and stir and stir and stir so it wouldn't stick to the bottom of the pot. So it took some effort to cook in 1924. Some of the gadgets that mom might use in 1924. Do you know what this is for? What do you think? Mixing. This is an egg beater from about that time. And this is what do you think? A good girl. You know your way around a kitchen. This is a potato masher. That's exactly right. If you want cinnamon on your oatmeal, mom would buy cinnamon sticks. Exactly. And you would take a grater like this and you would rub. Did you know cinnamon is tree bark? Yeah. And mom would rub that into the pot, or maybe some nutmeg, and that would give your oatmeal a flavor. So after you have breakfast, we're going to get dressed for school. Now, getting dressed for school in 1924 was actually pretty easy because you didn't have that many clothes to choose from. You might have had 4 or 5 dresses, skirt, maybe a blouse if you were a little girl. And boys, you might have 3 or 4 sets of clothes. And when I say sets, I mean that you usually had pants and a little jacket that matched and a button-down shirt. So your pants had buttons, your shirt had buttons, your coat had buttons. Girls, your dress had buttons because no zippers. 100 years ago was the very first zipper, 1924. But it took a while to catch on. So in 1924, you just had buttons. But if you lost a button on your clothes, mom would sew it back on. People took care of their clothes. Girls, you notice that I said dresses? You would have dresses in your drawers or your closet. Girls couldn't wear pants to school. No leggings. I know. Look at your face. No leggings, no shorts, no sweatpants, nothing like that. Girls wore dresses. Boys, sometimes you wore short pants, like shorts. They would come down to your knees, and your socks came up to your knees in the wintertime. But boys sometimes didn't get long pants till they were a little older. Now, I think we need to talk about shoes, because as I'm looking, I see an array of amazing shoes. I see sneakers that light up, sneakers that are colorful. In 1924, this is the kind of shoe. Now these are for little children, but this is the kind of shoe you would have had. Hard. No sneakers, no Crocs, no sandals, no flip-flops. Just hard shoes. And your job was to take care of those shoes. These shoes probably came from your brother or sister, and when you're finished with them, you're going to pass them down to the next child in the row. You're going to pass them down to your brother or sister. So if you got a hole in the bottom of your shoe, you took it to the shoemaker. And he would take something like this. He would put it inside the shoe to give it stability, and he would fix your shoe. He could put a new sole on your shoe. He could do new stitching around your shoe. But then he would send you home and you could polish your shoes. That was one of your chores. You would take some shoe polish. You would put waxy shoe polish all over your shoe. You would let that dry, and then you would have to buff your shoes to make sure that they were waterproof and that they lasted a long time. That would have been one of your chores. Now, let's talk about socks. Let's say you're getting ready to put on one of these hard shoes and you notice that you have a hole in your sock. What are you going to do with that sock? Let's be real. What do you do at your house right now if you have a hole in your sock? What do you do? Well, see, I have 4 children and I never sewed a sock in my entire life. But that is exactly what they did in 1924. You are smart. They would take that sock and they would put it over something like this called a sock darner. And Mom would go to the notion store and she would buy this. This is all the important sock colors and sweater colors. You'd fix your sweaters too. So Mom would sew up your sock and she would say, here, try to be more careful. If your baby sister had a hole, she would use a tiny one. This is for a baby sock. But people took care of their clothes. They made sure that they could pass them down. If you got a little taller, Mom let the hem down. If you got a little bigger because you're eating all your healthy food, Mom would let the waistband out of your skirt or your pants so you could wear it longer. That's just the way people did things. Clothes were homemade or you could buy them in a store. In 1924, Oxford had several clothing stores and you could buy clothes. But a dress cost $1. $1. And it was a nice dress. And boys, your little suit of clothes, a shirt, a pants, and a jacket would have been $4.25 in 1924. Now, the last thing I want to talk to you about is the hairstyles. Because ladies, you know how Mom won't let you out the door before she fixes your hair for school? Well, in 1924, hair was only this long. The popular style was called a bob. And there would have been bangs. And sometimes you wore a bow in your hair, or you pulled those bangs over and had a barrette in your hair. But mostly, hair was only this long. Boys, you had a haircut pretty much like most of you have now. Like a grown-up dad haircut, only on a little boy. So that was pretty interesting. But ladies, if you wanted curly hair, which moms seemed to love in 1924, they would take this little gadget here. This is a curling iron. She would, but there's no cord on it. It's not electric. So how do you think she got it hot? How do you think she got this hot? Tell me.
Maybe you do what you do when you cook stuff.
Exactly. She would take it over to that coal stove. And she would put this in the stove. But there's no temperature gauge on here. She would just have to guess how hot it was. And then she might do this. And she would say, dear, don't move. Hold still. And then she would curl your hair. And hopefully it was just the right temperature, because this makes me glad I live in 2024 instead of 1924. So boys and girls, you're all dressed for school. You have your clothes all set. And by this time, it is 9 o'clock. And time for...
Good morning, boys and girls. It's time for school. Can you spin around so that you're here at the desk? You're facing the desk? Good morning. So, in 1924, guess what we didn't have? Actually, anywhere, not just here in Oxford, but we didn't have it anywhere.
a lot of things we didn't have. But we didn't have kindergarten. So in 1924, as a 5-year-old, you would have still been home. You would have still been helping out on the farm or helping out with little chores around the house and maybe having some free time. But you would have been home. But starting in first grade in 1924, if you lived in the town of Oxford, this is the building you would have come to school in. We call it a history center now, that's what it is. But in 1924, it was a schoolhouse. And I don't know exactly how the classrooms were laid out because we don't have the walls, but it's quite possible that this is the very place that you would have sat in 1924 if you started out school. Now, how do you think you would have gotten to school in 1924? Yeah. Walk. Yeah. Why do you think you would have walked? There weren't school buses. Now, there were starting to be cars, and in Oxford there were a few cars, but they were still pretty new and kind of expensive, and so most people still had horses and wagons. But you would walk, or if you were lucky, you had a bike. Maybe your dad or a neighbor was coming near the school, and they might have hitched up their wagon and their horse, and you could have hopped in the back for a little bit of a ride. But most of the time, whether it was raining or sunny or snowy, cold, you would be walking to school. So you say to me, but I don't live in Oxford and I have to walk all that way. I mean, I'm on the bus for a half an hour or so. I'm going to have to walk all that way. There were not just the 6 schools that we have now in Oxford School District. There were lots of schools. You see this map? This is all in the green is where people who go to Oxford schools live. This is the Oxford School District in the green. All the red dots are how many schools were in Oxford area in 1924. So if you lived in outside of town, I live way out here in a little village called Louisville. So if I lived there 100 years ago, my sons would have gone to this school right here until they were in the 8th grade. This is a picture of it. Right here, this Louisville school. These are some of the schools that were on these, were here 100 years ago on these map. And some of them are still there. Some of them are houses now. Some of them aren't. This is the building that we're in. This is the school that we were in. Okay? That's right here. So you wouldn't have had as far to walk. You wouldn't have had to walk all the way into town to get to school. But it would have been a walk. And that's why we needed the bell. You would have gotten to school, and if it wasn't quite time to come in the building, you could have played out on the playground, and the teacher would have come to the door, and she would have rung the bell to say, come on inside. But she would have rung another bell probably too, especially out in the country, but here on this building there was a bell. Because sometimes as you're walking, you're daydreaming, you're walking real slow, maybe you're tired, and you're late. And you hear that bell, and you know you've got to pick up the pace to get here. So in this building, there was a bell on top of the building too. And when, do you guys know that in your playground area, there used to be another school and it got torn down? I think there may be a picture next time you go out to recess. I think on your way out, there may be a picture on the wall there. That's the picture of the school, and this is a picture of that school. And you see the bell tower up here. So when they built that school, they took the bell tower off of our building and they put it over there. And then when this building got old and they felt like they needed to tear it down, they saved the bell and it went someplace else. Does anybody know where that bell is now? It's not too far from here. It is at your school. And what happens every morning about 9 o'clock? They ring the bell. So, yeah. So the flag helpers, that's right. Have you guys gotten to be flag helpers? This week? Oh, that's so exciting. So exciting. So I love it when I am coming into work and it's about 9 o'clock and the bell is ringing. But I know when I hear the bell that I need to get in here and get ready because we open at 9 o'clock. So I know that it's time for me to be here. Okay. So you're in here, you're in the building. Your day has started. What are you learning? What do you think you're learning? It's not very different than what you learn now. What are some of the things you learn now? Yeah. Go ahead. Well, that is what you're learning today, isn't it? Very good. How about you? Did you have something? You had your hand up? No? No? So, are you learning about math? Adding and subtracting numbers? Yeah. They learned math too. They called it arithmetic. That's a little fancier name. How about reading, writing? Are you learning about putting words together and things like that? They learned that too. They called it English, and they learned their spelling and grammar, how to put a sentence together. They learned geography, which is maps. They learned history 100 years ago, what happened 100 years ago for them. And then they learned, are you guys learning how to write, make your letters? Yeah. So they learned that too. But they also got graded on it. They got graded on how neatly they wrote and how well they formed the letters. And that was called penmanship. And this is an example of someone's penmanship book. Okay? And I'm going to open it up and you can see the lesson. This is a sentence that was written at the top of the page, and it says, 5 robins on a limb. Okay. And then over and over again, that person wrote 5 robins on a limb. And so the teacher would look at it and say, you did a pretty good job of making your letters, and it's nice and neat. I can read it, and so you get an A. I was graded on penmanship when I was your age, when I was a little bit older than you. I did not get an A. I did not get a good grade on penmanship, so I'm very glad that we don't get graded on penmanship anymore. There's one thing I forgot to tell you about, and that was that a lot of these buildings, this building had 4 classrooms in it, 2 downstairs and 2 upstairs. But a lot of these little buildings, look, they're tiny. They're not very big. They were only 1 room. And I said that my sons would have gone to 8th grade out here. So they were teaching kids from 1st grade to 8th grade in buildings that had 1 room in it. And so there would be 1 teacher. And the little kids would sit up front. And as you got older, you would move further and further back in the classroom. And when you were in 7th and 8th grade, you would be sitting in the back rows. And part of your job would have been to help the younger kids with the lessons that the teacher was teaching if they didn't understand. Yeah, so you would be a helper. Okay. Everybody, you have iPads you work on? Yeah. No iPads back then. There was nothing like that. What you would have had at your desk, there was paper. As you can see, someone had the penmanship book, but that was mostly in the big cities like Philadelphia. That would have had paper, maybe in Wilmington and Delaware. But what we would have had out here is something called a slate board. And this black here is called a slate. And you can write on that with a piece of chalk. So it's sort of like a dry erase board with the dry erase markers. And I think sometimes if you have those, you bring in a sock and you can wipe it out. That's what you would do. You would use your chalk. The teacher would have a big one, just like your teacher probably has a big whiteboard. She would have had a big blackboard. She would do the lesson on the board. You would copy onto the slate, and then when you were done with that, you would take your cloth and you would wipe it off, and you could start all over again. Oh, yeah? Oh, from a movie. You've seen it on a movie? Okay. A little girl yesterday said she still has a chalkboard at home, and they're not, some people still have chalkboards too. But this would have been how you would have done your work, probably not with paper. And every student would have had one. So the last thing I want to talk about is what students would have been called, what their names would have been. Because that changes as the years go through. So 100 years ago, the popular girls' names would have been Mary or Betty or Helen or Dorothy. Are there any little girls with those names here? No. Nobody uses those names much anymore. Maybe Mary. And then little boys, this isn't too different, would have been Robert or John or William or James. Do we have any little boys named James? Okay, so that's not so different. Yesterday we had nobody had the names, even the little boys. There were no Jameses, no Williams, no Roberts. So, but you would have sat just like this. This would have been an example of your desk. The chair is connected. You would have sat row and row and just done your work. There wouldn't have been circles or things like that. You wouldn't have gotten up and moved around. And after a while, you're getting tired. You've been sitting for a long time.
stomach's starting to get rumbly, and it's a good thing that the clock has been moving because now it's 12 o'clock. And what are we going to do at 12 o'clock? Lunch.
It's now 12 o'clock. It's my turn to talk to you a little bit. Okay. So, turn to face this way, please. It's 12 o'clock. You've been sitting in class and you've been learning all that good stuff, but now it's time for lunch. Yay, lunch! I love to eat lunch. Yay. So, let's think about this a minute. A lot of the schools were just one room. This might have had 4 rooms, 2 up and 2. Do you see room for a cafeteria in here? No. Oh, they didn't have cafeterias. That's right. So, what do you think you did for lunch? What do you think you did? You brought something from home, probably. Okay. Or what else do you think you might have done?
I think you might have eaten on your desk.
You might have eaten at your desk. That's right. If you lived in town and were close enough, you might have walked home to eat your lunch. You'd walk home and say, "Hey, Mom, I'm home. What's for lunch?" And she'd feed you lunch, and then you'd walk back to school. If it was too far to walk home and come back again, you probably brought your lunch with you. And you probably would have brought it maybe in a paper or cloth sack, maybe in a tin bucket or a tin box. Do you bring your lunch in a tin box? Does anybody here ever bring their lunch to school? Do you? Do you bring in a tin box? What do you bring it in? Lunchbox? What kind of a lunchbox? Do you have a picture on your lunchbox? Huh? Say it again, please. I didn't hear you. A sandwich bag. That's very good. What do you have on your lunchbox? Do you have a picture on your lunchbox? Huh?
He said Pokemon.
Pokemon? I didn't hear very well. Thank you. But you bring your lunch in a lunch bag and have a sandwich or something in yours? Sandwich bag. Okay. Well, so you come to school and you probably eat your lunch at your desk. Maybe if it's a nice day outside, you might go eat outside on the playground because, yeah, you had recess. You had a chance to go out because you've been sitting all day, and they gave you extra time to run around and play and have a good time. Let's before we go to recess, let's think about this for a minute. We already said that most of these schools didn't have electricity, and they didn't have running water. Now, if I'm sitting there eating my lunch, I might be a little thirsty. There's no water fountain. What am I going to do? What do you think I'm going to do? Well, you might maybe bring some milk with you from home. Maybe. What else might you do?
You could go outside and if there's some water nearby, you could scoop some up if you brought a cup.
You know what? That's exactly what they had to do. Most of the schools had what they called a water pump. Now, this is a picture. It's a little gray and faded, but it shows a pump. And what it is it's a metal contraption. It has a pipe that goes down into the ground into a well. And there's this long handle. And you lift that handle up and down and up and down. And as you do that, the water comes out the spigot. Yeah. Have you seen that some places? I've seen some at like parks and campgrounds and things.
Yeah, at the zoo, so we can wash our hands because we had this like water fountain and we would play with it.
Okay. So there still are some places that have pumps, but they would send people out. Maybe 2 people go out, and one person would pump the handle, someone else would hold a bucket, and they'd bring the bucket in, and people could have something to drink. Okay. Or wash your hands. Okay. Now, something else I want to talk about. This isn't the most pleasant thing, but after you've eaten and you had something to drink, you might need to do something else. Does anyone have to go to the bathroom? We have one room, no electricity, no running water. What did they think they did? Well, in 1924, a lot of places had something they called a privy or an outhouse, okay, which was a little shed, little building out back there, a roof and walls and a door, and you go back there and you can use the bathroom. Nowadays, you might call it a porta potty or a porta john.
Yeah.
You ever been somewhere they had those? Yeah. So something like that, but a little bit darker and a little bit more spiders and anyway. But everybody had that. That's just what they did. Not too many people had indoor plumbing with sinks and toilets and things like that. So that's what a lot of people had in 1924, and you just did it. You didn't think a thing about it. It's what you had to do. All right, so back to the fun stuff now. Recess. Kids then like to play games just like you do. When you go out to the playground, what kinds of things do you like to do? How about someone in the back there? Does anyone back there ever do anything? What? Yes, ma'am. Excuse me for pointing, but I don't know people's names. I apologize. What's your name? Isabel. So what do you like to do recess? Hide and seek. Guess what? Children in 1924 like to play hide and seek. Yeah. What else might the kids do in the playground? Go ahead. I was basketball and I'm sorry. I apologize again. I don't know names. Yes. Tyree. What do kids like? What do you like to do? Play with the slide. You know what? They might very well have a sliding board or a swing. They might have tied a rope to a tree and made a swing on it, or they might have had a seesaw or teeter-totter. So that equipment kind of things. Some schools did and some schools didn't. Okay, what else do you think kids might like to play? Soccer. They might have played soccer, but probably a different game where you kick the ball. Anybody here ever play kickball? You kick the ball and you run around the bases? Yeah, that was a new game in 1924. It was just invented in 1917, and it was very, very popular. So let me tell you what else. I'm sure you could come up with lots more things. Let me get through because we have other things. They might have run races. Okay, they might have played baseball. You might have had jump ropes or marbles or a game called jacks. Anyone here ever play jacks? You bounce the ball and you pick up little metal pieces. Okay. So that's some of the things that people were doing. Okay? So after your nice recess, and probably a little bit longer than the recess you have now, time passes, you go back to class, you're doing some more schoolwork, and 3 o'clock comes, and yay! School's done for today. You get to go home. And you walk to school, and guess what? You get to walk back home again. Okay? Now, let's pretend for a minute that you were in this school, and you walked out and went down 5th Street here, and you came to Market Street. You thought you're walking home toward Market Street. If you walk down that street, you're going to walk along. You're going to come to some train tracks. In 1924, there were a lot of trains coming and going to Oxford. So you'd stop at the railroad tracks, and you'd be really careful before you walked across the railroad tracks. And then you walk up the hill a little bit. It's a little hill. And you see a big white building on the right-hand side, just up a little bit. And that building is still there. Now, up until 1923-24, it belonged to a family and someone lived there. There was their home. But in 1923-24, a group of people thought, we have a better use for that building, and they bought it, and they still use it for the same things today. Now, if you walk past there, you might see some big red trucks. Some might have ladders on them. Some might have hoses. What kind of trucks do you think I'm talking about? What kind of trucks? Yes, sir, right there in the red shirt. What kind of trucks? Fire trucks. That was the fire station, and it started back in 1924, and it's still there. They're still there helping the community. Now, when you walk past, on your way home, you might walk past the fire station, and there were lots of little shops and things along the way home. You could buy your notions. You could go to the shoemaker. They might stop at a store. They have candy. Okay? But little stores, nothing big like we have at Walmart, some of those things. But lots of little places. And there's lots and lots of things that you could see on your way home. But finally, after leaving school, walking home, let's see what happened, what's going on at home.
Okay, it's around 4 o'clock. You walk in the door. There's a man in your house. It's the doctor. The doctors would come to your house if somebody was sick or just to give a checkup to somebody. Maybe your baby brother needed a checkup. But the doctors made house calls, and they'd bring everything that they needed with them. And that was just the thing. A lot of people didn't have cars back then, so the doctors would have he might have a car, or they would use a carriage and horse and go around and make their house calls. So that was one interesting thing that would happen 100 years ago. So Mom says, okay, supper's going to be in about an hour or so. Why don't you go outside and play? Some of the popular toys would have been Raggedy Ann, and then she had a brother Andy, and there were books to go with them. And again, we talked about marbles, and when we're finished and you can get up and walk around, we have some of the games here. We had marbles. Little girls had tea sets, doll houses, their dolls. Little soldiers made out of metal were for the boys. Do you have these in school? You play with these? Did you? Okay, Lincoln Logs. Yeah. Tinker Toys, that was another building set. And then again, popular games, if you played with your kids, the friends in the neighborhood or out on the farm, you played dodgeball, baseball, horseshoes, tag, card games like Old Maid and Go Fish, hide and seek. But if you lived on the farm when you got home, what do you think you had to do?
Do all those chores.
Oh, yeah, do all those chores again. Yeah. Had to help Mom and Dad do the chores. You'd pick the vegetables in the garden. You'd weed the garden, milk the cows, probably have to go get some more eggs, things like that. But you also had some free time. You could go swim in the pond or go fishing. There were fun things to do out there. Ride a horse. There were some fun things to do. So Mom calls you in for dinner. And foods back then, that's when tin cans started to be used, and they would can in tin cans, or things were packaged in great big cans like this, like your marshmallows came in that. That was a treat to have that. Or your crackers would come in something like this. But we talked about oatmeal before. Moms really liked you to have oatmeal. But that's because Quaker Oats Company was giving gifts to the moms in their Quaker Oats. They could get themselves a whole set of breakfast dishes that would come inside the oatmeal box. So moms love for you guys to eat oats. Other products that were coming about in 100 years ago, Kleenex, tissues. They came about in 100 years ago. Zippers, we talked about that before. No more buttons. You could get zippers. Wheaties cereal, Band-Aids, popsicles, cheeseburgers. Dum Dum lollipops, do you like them? Yeah. 100 years ago, you might be able to find a Dum Dum lollipop at the candy store, at the little grocery store. Mr. Goodbar candy bars, and the little flags that were on the Hershey Kisses. They were starting to put those little flags in there. So, it's after dinner. You had probably a few more chores to do. Help Mom wash the dishes, dry the dishes, clean up after dinner. There were no dishwashers, except for you guys. What do you guys do after dinner? Okay, what do you do? Don't know? Okay, go ahead. You watch TV. Do you think they had TVs 100 years ago? Uh-uh. No, imagine that. You probably have to do your homework and read a book or something, but no TVs. But what the family did do, they would sit around a radio, and usually there were a large size radio, and they would listen to radio shows on that radio, baseball games, Amos and Andy show. That was one of the radio programs. Your Hit Parade, which was music, Grand Ole Opry. But if you lived in town, here in Oxford, we had 3 movie theaters that you could go to. And on Fridays and Saturdays, there were lines down the block, people waiting to go into the movies. And you could see cartoons. There were some, regular motion pictures. They would put shows on there, plays, musical groups. But those were some of the things you could do 100 years ago instead of watching TV. So, do you think you'd like to live 100 years ago? Sounded pretty tough, but there were some nice things too about it. So after that, what are you going to do after watching TV?
Go to bed.
Go to bed.
Go
All
to
right.
bed.
Good night.
How late am I going to let them stay up? Till, let's see, 9 o'clock? Do you guys stay up till 9 o'clock now?
I stay for
8 o'clock. Oh, well, that's the end of our presentation. And you guys were so good sitting here. We're going to give this bag to your teacher. And in the bag is a picture of the bell tower that's across the street. And it's a dot to dot. So, and there's 100 dots on it. So you'll be able to go back, hook all the numbers together, and then you can color it if you would like. And also, we have a sticker, which, oh, Mrs. Warren will show you right over there. See the sticker, and your teacher can give you that. And what we're going to do is let you all get up and walk around and look at things. We ask you, please don't touch